everybody, I'm Tall.
And I'm Small.
And today we are going to continue to run through the AAMC's MCAT official study guide by going through all their bullet points and then expanding on them with more information of our own research. So Small is going to be taking us on a journey through Psych Soc, and in this video we are talking about extra senses besides the main ones that are really, really high yield, and they go into much more depth on the MCAT, which are hearing and vision, but we have other senses which we talked about in the first video, but we didn't really go into any kind of depth. So what are some of those other senses, and what do we need to know?
So we've actually already kind of talked about some of them, but it's good to mention them again in more detail, especially the pathways that they take once they are transduced into electrical signals. So the first one on here is somatosensation. And there is a typical misconception in basic physiology classes that somatosensation is just touch. But what else do you think of when you think of somatosensation?
Somatosensation. So touch, would that include like temperature and pain and stuff like that?
Yeah, perfect. So pressure, vibration, pain, temperature, they all end up in the somatosensory cortex, which is in that parietal lobe.
Okay.
So we know vision, occipital lobe, hearing, temporal lobe right there by the ears, and then kind of all of the rest of them, somatosensory stuff, parietal lobe.
Okay, which is the somatosensory cortex.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
And so one of the cool things when we talk about the thermoreceptors is that there's a physiological zero. So even though we know that our regular body temperature is 98.6 or something like that.
Yeah.
We call that physiological zero because any changes in it, or above 98.6 or whatever would be, above normal.
Yeah.
So that's how they kind of talk about it in psychology. I think that's really cool.
Okay. Yeah.
And what else? We talked about the 2-point threshold as well, with just being there's different concentrations of those touch receptors all over our body. So there's much more of them in our fingertips than there would be on our back.
I even remember, I think the one with the highest concentration is like your bottom lip.
Oh, yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
Because I remember doing that 2-point test, and that was the most sensation that I had, or the most, the smallest, just noticeable difference.
So your highest discrimination.
Highest discrimination, yes.
Yeah. So we also already talked about taste as well. We talked about taste being chemoreceptors, and they're highly specific chemicals. We can tell between tastes really well. There's 5 main tastes, and I never get them right. Can you name them all?
They are sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami.
Perfect. Well done.
And don't they localize to specific parts of the tongue?
So I think I've learned that in a class before, and then I had somebody else say that they don't. I'm not really sure, but I have learned that.
It's probably not a big deal for the MCAT.
Right.
But like you've mentioned before, what people call taste buds, those are actually like the microvilli inside of the actual the lingual papillae that we see.
Yeah, and so in order to taste something, it has to be dissolved. So it dissolves into the lingual papillae, and then it goes down into the lingual papillae, and then on the inside we find those taste buds.
Right.
And like I said, they literally look like little flower buds. And so what I would suggest to you guys when you're going through reading whatever external resources you're going to use, fill out this outline and include pictures for yourself. Let yourself visualize what each of these things really look like, especially the pathways, like maybe how the optic tracts cross and all of that. But
Toblerone and a pool noodle.
Yeah, exactly. All that good cochlear stuff.
I hope so. I hope people have listened to hearing before they just heard me say that.
So really quickly, the kind of pathway that taste takes would be dissolved on the lingual papillae, then through the brain stem, and then to the thalamus, like so many of the other senses we've talked about, except for
smell.
Yep,
olfactory.
olfaction. Yep. And it is a chemical sense tied to emotion. It's also tied to how things taste, right? You can eat more broccoli as a kid if you hold your nose and eat it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really. Is it because as you're chewing it in your mouth, you're getting little bits of the actual taste part of it, and they're just kind of going back up through the back of your nose, and you're smelling them?
I have absolutely no idea.
Interesting. But you're right. Yeah. When you cover up your nose, you really don't taste things as much.
Yeah. And so for us to breathe something in and smell it, the chemicals need to be aerosolized. right? And then we have a highly specific chemoreceptors in our nose, which I think is fascinating. And then I think they need to be dissolved into the nasal mucus before the receptors can receive them, which is why we have mucus in our noses.
Right.
Okay, and then some. Oh, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was gonna talk about pheromones. I see you wrote that down.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a little bit about pheromones because I was talking to someone recently who was explaining why or like how our pheromones work.
Yeah.
So with something like a dog or a lot of other animals, they have this thing called the organ of Jacob, which like if you ever see a dog like with its mouth kind of open and it like leans its head back, it's trying to direct pheromones onto that organ so it can detect like what's going on in its environment.
Yeah.
But also other animals, and I can't say for sure if everyone besides human are affected like this, but a lot of other animals, they cannot control the instinct that happens in response to pheromones.
Right.
Whereas we can. Pheromones still influence us, and most of the time at a subconscious level. But when we smell pheromones, we aren't overcome by our instincts. We have our prefrontal cortex to keep that in check. Other animals that don't have it as developed, they are more at the mercy of the instincts that are triggered by pheromones.
So that makes a lot of sense. The only thing I've read so far is that other animals have actual receptors for pheromones, and we don't have those receptors.
Oh, okay.
So even if they do play a part, right, it would be a subliminal, so below threshold thing, because we don't have receptors for it.
And I might be wrong now that I think about it. It might not be called the organ of Jacob. It might just be called like the Jacob's response or something. But either way, there's some kind of bulb that is essentially an olfactory bulb, but it's specifically for pheromones. And maybe that's where other animals have specific pheromone receptors and we don't.
Wow, that is fascinating. I think there's a debate on whether or not it affects humans, and so I guess we've concluded that if it does, it's not something that we consciously recognize, and it's something that we can overpower because we have a more developed prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. So talking about that olfactory pathway very quickly, an aerosolized compound will go to the olfactory nerves in the epithelium of the nose, of the snuffy, as my parents would say. Olfactory bulbs are right on the bottom of the brain. And then some of those little bits of the pathway will go to the limbic system.
Yes.
Which I think is really cool.
It goes directly to the brain. Like it doesn't root through the thalamus like other things do.
Yep. And then because some of that it goes through the limbic system, the intense accuracy of our olfactory system allows us to have very specific memories linked to a smell.
Yeah.
Which I think is incredible because like walking through a school building before, like in high school and college, I have caught little whiffs of a smell that have taken me back to one specific day in elementary school when I was in this one hallway at the very front of the school near the kindergarten hallway. And I know exactly where it is, and I know exactly what the paintings were on the wall, and I could describe the hallway to you.
Yeah.
But I think that's incredible that it works that way.
I think another one that's probably more universal to people, because I always talk to people about this and they say the same thing, is like recently, like right now we're in late February and it just started getting warmer down where we are, and when I stepped outside like the first day that we got a warm front, I just sniffed the air and like just spring hit my mind.
Oh yeah.
And I felt it and I envisioned it and I had a really powerful like emotional and physical response to just smelling the air that was warmer. It's probably like humidity and flowers and certain things that are associated with spring that I'm subconsciously recognizing.
Yeah.
But it was like, it like overcame me for a second. I was just so happy, like spring was coming and this winter has been awful.
Did it remind you of lacrosse practice? Because it reminds me of soccer practice when I smell that smell.
Actually, yes. It reminded me of starting out the season and and being on the field and like the smell, even the smell of grass.
Yep.
Like a lot of people who played sports, they'll remember back to the sport that they play, and that really triggers that response with them.
What a powerful sense that we have.
I know, it really is cool.
It's not appreciated enough.
Yeah.
So a sense that we don't talk about a whole lot is the kinesthetic sense. And when I first read it, I thought kinesiology, kinesiotape, all that, so like movement. And then I read the next word, proprioception, which I know is like your position of your body. So that made me think yoga. And so the actual definition of kinesthetic is just knowing where your body parts are in space, even if you close your eyes. And
is there any difference between that and proprioception? Because I always knew that as proprioception.
Like knowing where your body is?
Yeah.
These were written as the same thing in the external resource that I used.
Okay, yeah. It seems right. I kind of remember them being interchangeable words, but yeah, you might see it written as kinesthetic sense or proprioception.
So we get all of these inputs from our muscles and our joints. So like Tal and I do yoga a whole lot, just to stay de-stressed, and also it's really good for your body.
Flexible.
Right. And so in certain poses, even if you've been up there for a long time, you'd think maybe that you start to lose feeling in certain areas or whatever, like maybe you've been in tree for a very long time, but you know exactly where your legs are, you know exactly where your arms are.
Until I close my eyes in tree and then I literally fall over.
Right. But those signals, those inputs from our muscles and our joints let us know where our body parts are. And we get better at proprioception the more we do things that help us practice it, kind of like something like yoga.
Yeah.
And then...
and that does all root to the cerebellum, I think.
For balance.
Yeah.
That would make sense, yeah.
It probably goes other places in the brain to your somatosensory cortex and your parietal lobe, but I think the cerebellum also has a lot to do with that. So if you do see something about proprioception, losing balance or something, certain motor movements, you can think cerebellum's going to be involved.
That's the only thing I know about cerebellum at the moment.
Yeah, me too.
We will have our own video on the brain parts. That's one of the AAMC's things.
Yes.
But I have not done my research yet. So, and the last one I have on this video is the vestibular sense, which I think is wicked cool.
Yeah.
And the Olympics are on right now. So how do we tie those two together? Do you remember me telling the story? Because I tell it way too much.
I don't.
Okay.
I would think Eddie the Eagle going down.
Okay, so
an
maybe
alpine thing.
Acceleration.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
So maybe normal people couldn't handle it, but
Eddie could.
Oh no. So vestibular sense, that rotational and linear acceleration. So for him, he was a ski jumper, right? So linear acceleration. But I think of this sense for figure skaters because they spin so quickly. And if we were to do that, people who haven't trained and aren't used to that, we would get really dizzy and fall over. But they don't do that because they have learned they've kind of adapted is not the right word. They've developed, they've desensitized, developed this ability to get used to that rotational movement and stop sending those messages to the brain. So as they spin and spin and spin, they're not getting dizzy. It's just normal for them. It's something they're used to. So I think that's really cool. You can actually desensitize your vestibular sense, and Olympians that do that for whatever reason, I just think that's fascinating. How cool that humans can do that.
Yeah, and if they can, like if you have an Eddie the Eagle, or if you have a figure skater who does that, I just say Eddie the Eagle, a ski jumper. If you have a ski jumper or someone who's trained and does that, like in my mind, I would think if I'm going down the ski jump, or if I'm spinning like 4 times off of one jump in a figure skating thing, all I think about in my head is like, in either situation, I would just be vomiting.
Right.
But they adapted to it, and yeah, that is really cool.
Yeah. So those are our other senses, and most of them are routed through the brainstem and then the thalamus, or just the thalamus, and then they go to their specific areas in the cortex. And yeah, I don't think they're quite as high yield as vision and hearing would be. Like, you don't need to dive into the structure of the tongue and the taste buds and all that.
Yeah.
Knowing the difference between the lingual papillae and the taste buds are probably good enough. But so those are lower yield, but still important, really cool. And maybe knowing about them will help you connect other things later on.
Yeah, could be the difference between a 129 and 130. Strong work.